Good afternoon, everyone. What a glorious afternoon. And I'm delighted to welcome you to one of the most eagerly anticipated events at the Small Wonder Festival, the presentation of the Charleston-Chichester Award for a Lifetime's Excellence in Short Fiction to Jane Gardam. The award was initiated with the 10th anniversary of Small Wonder 2 years ago. We felt that we wanted to honour the record of an exceptional writer of short stories. We were very glad to find a compatible partner in the University of Chichester, which specialises in teaching and promoting short fiction. Today's recipient, Jane Gardam, is a short story writer par excellence, as well as a much-admired novelist, particularly well known for her Old Filth trilogy, which actually began its literary existence as a short story. Not many short stories end up as trilogies. The chair of this session is Di Speirs. She was one of the panellists who nominated Jane Gardam for this award. Di is the originator of the BBC National Short Story Award with Book Trust and books editor at BBC Radio. Before I hand over to Di and to Jane, I'd like to thank our friends at Rathfinny Wine Estates for supporting this session, as well as the Arts Council England for making this whole festival possible. So can we now welcome Jane Gardam and Di Speirs.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you all very much for coming, and I can only say it's an enormous pleasure to be here with a writer whose work I've admired for many years and enjoyed reading both novels and short stories, and who is justly receiving the Lifetime's Achievement Award today. So I think another round of applause for Jane, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
As Diana said, with over 30 books published over a span of over more than 4 decades, Jane's writing life has encompassed a huge range. We were just worked out, we were trying to count up, decide which novels fell into which categories and what counted as children's and what counted as adult. And we decided the children's writing was as important as the adult writing. And if we include all of these, we have 8 novels, from Crusoe's Daughter through to the Old Filth trilogy that Diana just mentioned, a great body of children's work, a non-fiction piece about her Yorkshire home called The Iron Coast, and of course the short stories. And I think we decided there were 8 volumes in total, didn't we, Jane, of short stories. Yes. So Jane needs very little introduction here, and I'm sure I can see that all of you are fans and have read very many books. But she is a great chronicler of the old, the life-battered but valiant, the singular child, the snob, the lonely. And her work, with its pin-sharp social accuracy and its pithy wit, has been compared to writers as diverse as Jane Austen, Catherine Mansfield, Alice Munro, and Helen Simpson. As one critic wrote of her, she knows the world of the educated, affluent, middle-class elite inside out, but also outside in, and so that what seems at first to be a celebration of privilege becomes a devastating critique of selfishness, smugness, and blindness. Anyone who's read the Old Filth trilogy will recognise that, but it's there in a lot of the stories too. She's also very good on mystery, on magic, and on ecstasy. And you find all these themes and more. You find humour and tragedy sort of threaded throughout all the stories. There's a wonderful collection which Jane chose herself called The Stories. There are many others in collections like Missing the Midnight, which sadly couldn't be included in this, but there is a wealth out there to read. And we'll be talking about the stories and about Jane's writing life in a moment. But before we do, Jane is going to read you a story, and I can't introduce it because we've only just decided which one it's going to be, I think. Would you like to read?
Have we decided? I don't know. I hope we have. I thought all day, all last night, because the one that I really have rehearsed and would love to read to you was the favourite of William Trevor, who was sitting there last time I was here. And what an influence he has been. Can you hear me? What an influence on me he has been, and what wonderful short stories he wrote. I wish he was here today. Anyway, just so that he knows that I think so much about him. But I was lucky too, because I just liked writing short stories. I didn't know what was fashionable, and I didn't care what was publishable. So for years I just wrote them. And I don't know where they went, most of them. I don't think they were very good. Maybe they were. But anyhow, I've been so lucky, because over these decades, the short story has come slowly up to explode now as something worth reading. I've been very lucky in my publisher, especially in this big anthology, Richard Beswick of Little Brown, who said once, I think we'll do a big anthology of short stories. And I said, but you'll never sell it. Nobody reads them anymore. He said, you're out of date. He said, they are reading short stories again, which I hadn't actually noticed. And nothing could have been nicer to hear. I said, right, I've plenty to choose from, and I shall write some more. And we did. And in fact, these short stories have sold very well here and in America. And people now don't whisper the fact that they're a short story writer. Used to be thought lazy and childish. They say, yes, well, short stories are mostly what I do. Which isn't true either, because I long now to write a novel again, before I die, eventually. But I was supposed to read.
Shall we hear reading first?
I had to explain all that.
Yes, that's fine.
There are two. There's the one...
I think you should read... William Trevor's much loved here too. I'm sure the audience would agree with me. You should read the one that William Trevor likes. Right. And it doesn't matter if it's a little poignant on a Sunday morning.
Yes. He liked this, and I think, he understood it better than I do. It's called Soulmates, and it's almost the last one in this anthology. And it is... I'm not going to tell you what it's about. I'm not even sure. When Francis Phipps retired, he and his wife Patricia took a week's holiday on the Isles of Scilly. They were a prudent pair and had booked the best room in the hotel the previous summer. It had always been summer when they had holidayed on the Scillies long ago with their young children, all now successfully scattered about the world. Patricia Phipps had been uncertain about this return visit and the long motorway journey à deux. She thought it might be sad, but Francis said, what nonsense, how delightful to be going back again, with enough money for a luxurious hotel instead of the sandy-floored pub with its one bathroom. We shall take plenty of books, he said. The daffodils will be at their best. We shall walk. The food should be marvellous. And with luck, there'll be very few people. But it was cold. The room was glorious, but stood at the end of several blustery corridors, and 3 of its walls were windows onto the sea. The sea sucked and roared and ground and slapped against the very foundations of the single-story hotel and seemed in some way to tower over them in their beds. Beyond the spraying breakers, they could see the shine and dazzle of it to the far horizon. The Phippses seemed to swing with the sea when they closed their eyes. Each day they walked in the salty wind along lanes lined with chill, flattened daffodils that ran in trickles and eddies and torrents. Their shouting yellow was round every red boulder, every stiff black escalonia hedge. After luncheon, they slept. After dinner, they read their books. It was an hotel of great discretion, and although always full, seemed empty. There were a few couples of the Phippses' age, a tense little writer person with frizzy, iron-grey hair, a desolate-looking woman in a wonderful beaded dress of bright blue wool, and a Yorkshire couple, she fat and amiable, he gaunt and glum. The wife smiled eagerly across the restaurant at the Phippses. "Bit ominous, the wife," said Francis. "She looks as if she might divulge." "We can keep her at bay," said Patricia. Patricia was tired. The past few months of small, decorous, but nevertheless emotional retirement parties for Francis had drained them both. Since the university, where they had met 40 years ago, Francis had served his country and his department, and Pat had served him. Her achievement had been to create his setting, which was a tranquil house in Dulwich and dignified hospitality. In its long green garden there hung a pink hammock between a walnut tree and a pear. 2 nights before the end of their holiday, Pat felt a great longing to be back in this garden, and Francis, at the same moment holding the door for her to pass into the long corridors en route for dinner, said, "I'd say that a week was about long enough here, you know, Patricia, wouldn't you?" There was a slight easing up, though, tonight in the dining room. Somebody was laughing softly as they went in, and the grizzled novelist, wearing a black velvet suit, was drinking her coffee at the table of the wronged woman in the couture dress. The Yorkshire wife, rosy from the weather, was now looking hungrier than ever for conversation, and at last called shamelessly across from her table to the Phippses that her holiday was nearly over and was theirs. She had to be back in Boroughbridge on Saturday for her results. "Oh," said Pat, "examination results?" "Yes, I'm afraid so. I've had a medical examination. We're rather wondering what they will have found." Francis picked up his napkin and Pat picked up the menu. As she looked up from it, she met the glance of one of the other couple sitting across from them, rather in the shadow of the staircase. The woman smiled at her like a sister. Pat thought for a second that she was looking in a glass. When the pair left their table, the man came over and smiled at Francis. "Good evening." "Good evening." The woman said to Patricia, "I'm afraid things tend to get rather chatty by Thursday. Beware of people with operations." Later, the 4 of them found themselves together in the television room, waiting for the news, and the other man, Jocelyn Phillips, this is my wife Evelyn, said that nowadays he hated the news. "We sit in horror," said Francis. "We fear for our young." "You sound exactly like Jocelyn," said the wife. "Now, let me guess. You are at the bar. A judge?" "A civil servant. I have just retired." "Oh, me too," said Phillips. "Foreign Office. I went last year." The men bought brandy for each other and the women drank liqueurs. Conversation flowered. They were like old friends. The next day they all walked together to the tropical gardens, and Evelyn and Pat found a mutual interest in lilies. Automatically the 4 met up again after dinner, and at bedtime Jocelyn Phillips said how much they had enjoyed the day. Francis, for years considered to be the coldest of fish, said, "It has been delightful to meet you." Coming over to the Phippses' table at breakfast next day, Evelyn said, "Now look, I do hope you don't think us quite extraordinary, but we wondered if you'd come and stay with us tonight on your way home. We're hardly off your route, and it would break up the awful motorway for you a bit." Francis, standing clutching his napkin, said, "But how very kind." "Excellent idea," Jocelyn called across. At the reception desk, as they paid their bills, all 4 turned to one another. "Do you know," said Francis, if you really mean it." "Of course we do. Give us an hour's start to make things ready." "Well, this is most friendly, Pat." "But I should love to," said Pat. Address and directions given, everybody climbed into the helicopter for the mainland and their parked cars. Pat was surprised to see the woman in the couture dress and the writer saying affectionate goodbyes to the Yorkshire couple. She and Francis waved off the Phillipses and went to the nearby village for coffee and to look for a potted plant to take as a present. "What an extraordinary thing we've done," she said. "Whatever would the children say? I mean, they may be anyone. They may be serial killers. Somehow, did you think they looked rather cold when they went off? Remote?" "Nonsense," he said. "They're exactly like us. It's great luck. You hardly ever meet your own sort these days." Pat thought of the novelist and the rich woman and the Yorkshire pair. None of them had said goodbyes to her. She felt suddenly miserable and cut off. Miles further on, deep into Devonshire, Francis said at last, "Oh, well, it is a slight risk, I suppose. Never take up with people you meet on holiday and so on." But we've not met people we felt so at home with for years. We must be almost at that turning, are we not? The motorway exit was just ahead, and he swung towards it much too fast. As always, she said, "I hate the way you do that. You should let me drive." Usually he didn't answer, but today he said, "Wrist's a bit wonky. Traffic's much worse these days. I must say I don't enjoy driving anymore. Train next time." They reached the A road, then the roundabout for the by road, and then, yes, here it was, the turning for the house on no signpost and the little lane. The lane was long. It turned at sharp angles like the corridors at the hotel. It narrowed and became unkempt. Grass grew down a central ridge. Hedges gave way to a long metal field fence, and through it could be seen a red brick house with latticed windows, standing well back from the road and surrounded by grass. Its front and back doors were standing wide open so that you could see down a flagstone passage to more green fields behind. "Is it genuine?" asked Pat, "or is it pseudo-chudo?" "Can't tell," he said. "Very cunning if it's pseudo." They stepped from the car into total silence. Crocuses along the front of the house looked like flowers painted on a calendar. "It's empty," she said. "They can't have arrived." "It can't be," said Francis. "The doors are open." He knocked. "Hello there, hello." Not liking to walk in, they went round the side of the house to the back. A barn, a double garage, a shed or stable far across the field. No life. "Maybe it's the wrong house," said Francis. "Hello?" Suddenly, there were the Phillipses far away beside the shed, standing quite still, and then, as if at a pause button had been released, they began to move forward over the grass. They looked graver sort of people than those in the hotel. But this passed at once. The Phippses were welcomed warmly, and the men went off to get the luggage from the car, and Evelyn took Pat into the house, and the green spring day went in with them. There were books everywhere, an open log fire, photographs of exemplary children on a grand piano, a nice old overhead clothes era on the ceiling of the red and yellow tiled kitchen. "I feel I've known this house all my life," said Pat. "It's like my old home." "The four of us are so alike," said Evelyn. "Have you noticed that we all have androgynous names?" Pat looked away and said she hoped that Evelyn didn't think that she and Francis were androgynous. Evelyn laughed brightly, and she had really meant genderless. "All our names are genderless. It's no good to be genderless. It's so good to be genderless." "Now, what did you do as a young woman, Pat?" she asked later, washing salad in cold water. "Well, nothing, I suppose, after I left Oxford." Evelyn, amazed, cried, "But neither did I. I married straight from Cambridge. I thought there was nobody left like us." Dinner was perfect. Duck, green peas, and a creme brulee. "But however did you spirit it all up in an hour?" asked Francis. Jocelyn produced a second bottle of superb wine. Their bedroom was old rose chintz and a four-poster. There were flowers and hot water bottles. "It is heaven," said Pat. She wondered whether to kiss Evelyn's cheek or even Jocelyn's. She let it go. Francis, flushed with duck and claret, said, "Yes, heaven." He paused. "The hotel was good," he said, "but we were restless there, you know. It was the sea." "Ah, the sea," said Jocelyn Phillips. "We shall sleep tonight," said Pat, utterly. And they did sleep. They slept till nearly 10 o'clock the following morning and could not believe it. They awoke to silence. "My God," said Francis, "we'd better get on if we're to be home before we hit the rush hour. Better miss a bath." "Hello," Pat called on the stairs in the hall. "We're thoroughly ashamed of ourselves. Hello." No sound. They looked in kitchen, dining room, drawing room, study. There was no trace of last night's dinner or sign of today's breakfast. Front and back doors stood open. "Do you think we could look in the bedrooms?" There was nobody there. In the Phillipses' bedroom, not a thing was out of place. No clothes over chairs, no holiday unpacking, no hair in a comb. The bed the beds were carefully made up. The Phippses went outside. Barn, garage and shed watched them, but there was nobody. Pat pointed. Was that there last night? Across the garden, a large, lazy, pink hammock was slung between trees. Well, look here, Francis said, we have to go. This is ridiculous. I'll leave a note. It's very upsetting. He wrote the note and propped it against the kitchen telephone where the red message light was flashing. Do you think we should press it, he said. No, she said, no. No, don't. And grabbed his arm. Why not? No, she said. They closed the back door and the front door. It was some sort of a gesture. It had to be done. They drove away down the drive. I don't like this, he said. I don't like it at all. I should have pressed that button. Well, we'll ring them up tonight, naturally. I'm not sure, she said. I'm not sure I want to. I'm not sure we shall be able to. Oh, Francis, I'm not sure we'll get home. He took her hand and held it as he drove, steering one-handed along the lane beside the wire fence. They both looked together at the house as they passed it by. The front door and the back door stood wide open again. They could see clearly to the green fields beyond.
Thank you, Jane, and that was beautifully read too. And I mean, I think the ability you have to create these recognisable characters and then produce that twist in the tale is one of the things that endears you and draws audiences back to you again and again, because your stories so often do this. So, you know, we think we know who these characters are, we think we understand exactly who we're seeing, and in many ways we do. And then there'll just be something which goes beyond reality. You always enjoyed playing with that. Did you start doing that as a young child?
I don't know what my first short stories were like.
There is a story, isn't there, that you used to write secret stories and put them up the chimney, and then there was a calamity.
That was poetry.
Poetry. Was it true?
God, there was a calamity. They got burned, and that was the end of that. I was 8. But the first short stories, I don't know. I suppose seriously got down to writing them as short stories, not just one idea, another idea. I just loved the short story. At first it was great because I had friends and plenty to read. Then there came the long dead time of people sneering at them and saying they were either potted novels. Well, they did become pretty awful. There were potted novels and sort of awful stories that were kind of slices of life, which I do think was a dismal time. But then they began to improve, and I think the last years I've lived have seen a tremendous change. Because I think the French know much more about them than we do, and the Russians. But I didn't come upon them until quite late.
When you first started writing, when you were a young mother, and you say that writing was the thing you needed to do to stop you from either being bored or unfaithful, I read that was what you wrote.
Did I?
Well, that's what you said at the time. And I wondered if you were writing, when you were approaching a publisher to say, you know, can I send you stuff?
Otherwise I'll be unfaithful to my husband. No. No, I did just send a set of short stories once or twice, which they did publish as a sort of, they were linked short stories, which it was nice exercise, I think.
That was Black Faces, White Faces?
Yes, well, they were sort of picture postcards. We'd been in Jamaica with, my husband was a lawyer who had cases abroad, and we went to Jamaica. He went for 6 months. I went out for a little time, and it was wonderful. It was the first time out of Europe. All the colours were completely different. The sounds, the music, the people. I absolutely adored Jamaica. So I wrote a set of stories about it, and I wrote to my publisher and said, I've got a set of stories here about Jamaica. And he said, I said, would you publish them? And he read them, and he said, yes. But he said, I'd like a few more, these too few. Oh, I said, yes, I can do a few more. Those were the days when I thought that I could do anything, you know. It's very, very simplistic book of stories. It is, I think, still in print, but it's. I hope it does grab the joy I had in Jamaica, seeing another set of colours, particularly.
Yes. You've always enjoyed the colour and been able to bring across the exoticism, I think, of other places. I mean, in the many stories around Hong Kong, both in your novels but also in short stories like Pig Boy, which is one of my favourites in this collection, and it's an incredibly powerful story about a young wife who arrives for a first visit, I presume, much as you did, to visit her husband. And of course, he's busy most of the time, so she's left lonely and rather to her own devices, or entertained by rather ghastly wives of other men out there. And it's then suddenly she decides to go for a walk and uncover what turns out to be the real Hong Kong. It's very, very vivid. That writing just is as bright, feels as bright as the day you put it down on the page.
It's a very different Hong Kong now, actually, but I don't know, maybe those back streets are still exactly the same. But I went down them because I had a cleaning man at home called Mr. Swift, and he'd had a great love affair when he was in the... hope this interests you. When he was in the Air Force and had met a Chinese girl. And please, would you go and look for her and see if she's still about? And I said, but it's, 30 years or so. But I will. So I had nothing to do except sit and talk about nothing with ladies. So I set off around Hong Kong, and it was a revelation. I really got into a different world. And I found that woman. I did find her, and they all were talking, they all talked, but I didn't know what they were saying. And then one elderly lady said, why didn't the sergeant come back for her? So it had been remembered. That doesn't come into this story, but I was right in there. And I didn't get into the cart with the pig boy. No. I saw the pig boy, and my word, did we smell the pig boy. And the pig boys... the smells of Hong Kong were not of the great hotels in which we stayed.
But your character in that story actually finds the Hong Kong she loves then and sees the appeal of staying. And I was wondering if that was what was happening to you whenever you went on these visits. Presumably it did with black faces, white faces, and as well.
Oh, black faces, white faces. I could have stayed in Jamaica. Yeah, I could. Not Hong Kong.
No. And going back to the beginning, when you started writing, your mother had been an inveterate letter writer, I know. Did that sort of sense of seeing somebody writing all the time, was that one of the things that gave you a key into writing?
I'd never thought of it before, but you're right, it was. My mother had a bureau. I used to go through the little drawers in her desk and the things I found. But, she wrote and she wrote and she wrote. If anything happened, I mean, if somebody just got a bad cold, down she went to her bureau and she was writing, and they were very good letters. I wish I'd kept them all, kept some. She just could not. She was a woman who had not had the right education, very little education. She really stopped going to school at 12 to look after her two very naughty and stupid little brothers who had to go to public school. She had to look after them because her mother was rather like me later, at least I hope not like me. She had to go to join her husband, who was a merchant navy sea captain, leaving my mother aged 12 to bring up children. That was the end of her education. And there was someone who should have been a writer.
And was she delighted when you strove to go to university, something that you chronicled so brilliantly in The Flight of the Maidens, which again is a novel
It was very much like my life, yes, it was, yes.
And quite a sort of austere Yorkshire background.
It was.
Or serious. You said it was an unmad family, you said.
It was very a religious family. Church every Sunday. High church. I'd really like to have been a Catholic, my mother always said. Don't know why she didn't become one, really, because there's nothing stopping her. However, it has remained the Christian faith with me and my brother, who's now died, leaving a strange will. Also, my children go to church every Sunday. I never told them to, but they do. So Mother had a huge long influence on our lives.
Yes. And you understand, I mean, it seems to me in stories like the Easter Lilies, you understand how important, organised religion is, or the role of even just a particularly, as dear Miss White says, a very unbeautiful building in the middle of suburbia. You understand the need for that.
Yes.
Was that something you saw with your mother then?
Probably, but not in the same way. Mother was a much more spiritual person than I write about, I think. Miss White was very real and very good teacher of children. I taught you manners, she said.
Yes.
Rare statement now. Yes, the church was the centre of things. I got very tired of it. I rebelled. I went hell for leather, doing everything. But no, I was always back at church in the end. Yeah, and when I had children, I felt the need for them to be educated in the way I had been. And a lot of it being the St. James's Bible and the the wonderful services.
Mm-hmm. And is it something that still gives you comfort now?
Yes, it is. It's hard work when you can't kneel down. But
yeah, well, I hope you're excused. But it is, the sort of the sense of the religious and the sense of the more opaque spiritual, the mystic, invades a lot of your stories, I think. Is that sort of deliberate? Do you set out looking to write stories, or do you find characters are there and you attach the spirituality to them?
I've never spoken about this before, actually. I don't know. I don't think I attach Christianity to any of the characters. They're either them, they're ready to be written about, or they're not. And I don't really... Some of my old birds go to church, yeah. But that's not what I'm talking about. I mean, I talk a lot about the Quakers, which interest me very much. And, of course, in the East, and in Jamaica, every religion interests me very much.
But it allows your characters another dimension sometimes, I think.
I hope so.
And, of course, you're very adept at getting under the skin of people who appear often in the first few pages of a story to be delightfully characterful and mannered, but then actually turn out to have a streak of meanness or pettiness that we didn't necessarily expect. I'm thinking of people like the elderly ladies in the Tribute, who were wonderful, bitches, but gosh, they're mean, yes. But you're really gunning...
I enjoyed writing that story. It was about my aunt, who was treated like that by...
She was Miss Dench.
She was Miss Dench, yes, she was.
Yes, it's... do you want to tell people a little about the story?
Well, the story's about some elderly women who have been in the Empire, have employed nannies for their children. And one of these was Miss Dench, and the children always adored her. And she was wonderful with the children, but she was treated as a servant. And it got worse and worse and worse. And when they came back to England, they still employed her. She had no money at all, absolutely none, but she was very much a gent. You know, she looked right somehow, and even in old clothes, and the children loved her. And then they all scattered, they grew old, and the empire faded. And these women thought, when they heard that she was dead, that they would a little tribute to her. And the tribute was to go and have lunch together, the three of them, in Fortnum and Mason's or somewhere like that. I think it was Harrods. Harrods. And it's some time ago, so it was only about £10. But it was meant to be a lot of money. And
one of them wears her Wellingtons, or her Dr. Scholes, doesn't she?
One of them's wearing her funny old feet, yes. She can hardly get... And, of course, they're treated... They think they're all right, because, you know, and they are... In India, we were all right.
Yes.
We're all right now. And then a terrible thing happens. They told a woman who had been one of Dench's charges, a dear little girl, who had offered Dench half her egg. When they said there weren't enough eggs for the nanny as well. And this woman turns up And she presents, I won't tell you what she presents them with, but I hope that it's as bitter for them
I think.
as well, Dench would never have wanted, no. Yes. But it turns out, oh well, read it. There's an awful lot in my stories. They're like 3-volume novels.
But what it illustrates, I think, is your mercilessness when you want to, when you do want to put the knife in. You don't hesitate. There's nothing very ladylike about your approach to these, to sticking the knife in when you think these people have misbehaved.
It's an evil world, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've got to face it. I don't say try and make everybody good, but you've got to face what's there.
Mm. You're also very good at writing about children, I think. I love Swan is another of my favourites in this book, which is the story of he's a sort of, posh boy, I suppose, who goes to do social work because it's good for him and presumably will help his Oxbridge application or whatever, and looks after a little Chinese boy who
Sitting
doesn't...
over there.
Sorry.
Go on.
And he looks after a little Chinese boy who isn't speaking at all, and whose only empathy is with a bird, a swan in the end, and all the birds and natural world. And that's a very gentle story, because I remember reading it and expecting that something terrible would happen to either of the boys, and it's not at all. So you do there's every shade within your work, I think.
Again, that story had a basis, and it was I was taking the children by car somewhere North London, a rough old road, and a swan suddenly fell out of the sky and landed in... No, it was a bus I was in. It fell on the ground in front of the bus, and everyone in the bus got out. And that's how the story begins. Mm. And it happened, not like I made it happen, but it's the idea that miracles can happen, I think, that story is based on.
Yes. Well, you've written often about animals too, haven't you? In Missing the Midnight, there are several stories. The animals at the zoo who gather to have Christmas.
Yes.
You don't look very happy about it.
Well, people are not very keen on that story. It is...
I rather like it. I think I did it for Radio 4, actually.
I think you did do it for Radio 4, and it came out very, very well. Yes, it did.
Yeah.
It was better than reading it. Yeah, it was.
I wondered if you felt that you... I know that your lovely editor, previous to Richard, was Penny Hoare, who said of you that you had an interior life. And I've often thought that in another way you were quite similar to William Trevor, and I wondered who's very much your contemporary. I wondered if you felt you'd been quite lucky to live at the time that you have, in the sense that although you're here wonderfully in front of an audience now, you haven't had to do all of the audience-facing, as they might call it at the BBC, events that a modern, a younger writer sometimes has to do. You and William Trevor, I think, and Penelope Lively, other writers of that particular generation, predated having to be out there meeting people all the time, and I wonder if that's given you a freedom to write and a chance to have that interior life that is so important, and which is perhaps hard to get the space for now. I feel sorry for younger writers who are constantly on a circuit of festivals. Do you feel a lucky generation?
Well, yes, I was able to concentrate on what I was doing, certainly. I sometimes rather wished to be more famous than I was, but or a little richer, but... no, it was the way to do it with me anyway, was to get down to the book, and probably with everyone, put the book first, always the book first.
And were you as aware as I think, modern generations of writers are, that you were part of a group, you, Edna O'Brien, Penelope Lively, there are a great cast of wonderful short story writing women, all, in their sort of 70s and 80s now. You were all doing this. You were managing to get published and get your work out there in a quiet, perhaps unassuming way. Maybe fame didn't come as easily, but these are now fantastic bodies of work from all of you. Do you feel that your generation was special?
Penelope Lively and I, we started writing children's books, and we're not ashamed to say so. And of course, her children's books are marvellous.
Yes.
And I think we wrote about what we knew, actually. It was the time we had children and wrote about them, about children generally. That's putting it very simply, but
it is never...
The fame and the big prizes were not around
Yes. Yes, you have, you know, wonderful awards across a lifetime. Do you feel now, though, that you can be happy with a sense of fame and recognition? Has it come?
I think it's
too late, or is it?
Oh, it's a bit late, yeah. But I've been very.
You've done this 3 years ago.
No, I've been very fortunate, I think, really.
Now, I wonder if there are questions from the floor. Before I know we have an award to give you, and there are speeches to be made as part of this. But I'm sure that your many fans out here have got questions for you. So we might have time just for a couple. I think there's a mic here somewhere, and if somebody can put their hands up. Sorry, I can see one person down here.
Hello. You say always put the book first. How do you manage to do that when you've got young children?
They were very short books. I mean, sometimes they were 3 pages long with lovely illustrations by good illustrators. They were no big thing. But I do remember that I was desperately longing to write a real book. And I started writing the same morning, my youngest one went to baby school. I took him by the hand round the corner to Mrs. Parsons' school, came back, walked into the house. Upstairs, I had a very small study with all my books in it, and I sat down and I started. And that's, I was lucky because I was a kept woman. My husband was able to support me. We were very young, but the bar suddenly flourished and I was able to stay at home. But, you know, the time came around. It's almost time to go to Mrs. Parsons and pick him up. And then everything went, you see, till the next morning. And that went, I wrote 2 or 3 early books, and one or two of them are still in print. In that little room, full speed ahead.
You must have been very disciplined, though, because a lot of the time, with your husband away, you're in charge of 3 children. I think that is quite hard to do.
That was not easy. It was dreadfully difficult because all the horrors that happen as children grow up, all the psychological horrors and their sad adventures and their good adventures, you have to turn up and deal with them, and changing schools and what subjects and all that. I had to do that by myself, but it can be done. In fact, what a blessing to have something else to think about, really.
One thing I wanted to ask you was your mother said Jane has always had her ecstatic side. Do you know what she meant by that?
Well, yes, I did. I did feel ecstasy about many things. I think I was troublesome. I wasn't sort of easy, nice little girl to bring up. But I was very lucky in a country childhood. I mean, a real country childhood. My father's farm was where we went. He was a schoolmaster. And for all his holidays, we were in this very lonely, wonderful place. And in a way, I still, when I go to Cumberland, I still feel that's what I am. That's where I was ecstatic.
Yeah. More Cumbrian than Yorkshire?
Oh, much.
Oh, that's
much.
Interesting.
Much more.
Yes, that's because Flight of the Maidens is Cumbria, isn't it?
Yes, there's Cumbria in quite a lot
part
of
of
them,
it,
because
yes.
when I need a landscape, that's the one that is the most secure.
Now, are there more questions? I can't say yes. There's some right at the back and in the middle there. Sorry, I'm peering through the light here.
Hello. You described your characters as being ready to be written about. What are the signs when a character is ready?
Well, when I know someone well enough, I think. But as you get older, you know more. And I think that one thing I have learned about writing is that there are no minor characters. I mean, not only in novel writing, but in the theatre too. I think there are no minor characters. There's nobody that is not a human soul. Do you remember, who was it who said, that old man across the street, walking, dirty-looking old thing in a frightful old Macintosh, dribbling. He looks awful, he looks nothing. I tell you that he is a human soul. And of course Shakespeare knew this. If you remember the gravediggers in Shakespeare, I often ask people, come on, names of the gravediggers. Nobody knows. Nobody ever knows. Well, they don't know because they had no names. Shakespeare didn't give them names. He called them first gravedigger and second gravedigger. But we know them. All of us, we know what they look like, we see their movements, we see Yorick's skull. And that's the thing. I think every character, however apparently dull, that's great fun to do a character who is apparently dull and dreadful. I've done that in the third of my trilogy. Two very dreadful people get locked in a church in them, absolute idiots. But they are human souls. And that's what, if you're a genius, which of course I'm not, and we haven't got a genius, I don't think, at the moment, but that is what you aim for, to treat nobody as less important than anyone else.
And is that where the character Horser came from in The Great Grand Soapwater? Which is a lovely story about a tramp who breaks in and has this most humongous bath, and it's rather wonderful, isn't it? But
I have no idea where he came from. No,
he wasn't
passing an old tramp in the street, I should think. But it seemed to me how interesting if this filthy old creature were to knock on a very smart door, nobody in the house, go round to the back door open, I'll have a bath. And he gives himself the most tremendous bath. He wrecks the house.
He does wreck the house. He peels off the layers of newspaper from him, doesn't he, that he's
creatures
insulated
run
himself
out
with.
of
I
him
mean, you do wonder what walking into the bathroom afterwards is going to be
and
like.
the idea is you think of what he calls nice little woman, because he's seen her when he's walked by. Nice little woman. And you think what nice little woman would feel when she gets back home. Oh, yes.
Yes, but you are glad he's had his bath.
Of course.
Now, I know there's a question right at the back there. I saw a hand go up.
I was kind of interested when you mentioned your brother's strange will, or something to that effect.
I think we'll keep off that subject.
I was wondering if it might be touched on in one of your stories, perhaps, in the future.
No. It's too close to home.
No. Do you, I mean, obviously you've used your son as material. Have you used family much in a more benign or less contentious
it's
ways?
It's not like that, is it really? No. I mean, you can say you learn things through being with your family, but it's never is your family that you're writing about. That would be biography.
Yeah. And characters are composites, aren't they, of the people you meet?
Oh, very much so, yes. As we all are, I think. Our characters are in our books, but our humans are in themselves. We are made up of mothers and fathers and friends and lovers.
With the exception perhaps of the odd elderly lady, do you usually think your characters have got a redeeming quality? You're often very affectionate to them despite pointing up all their flaws.
Yes, I have some that I can't love.
Now, are there any more questions? I think we've probably got room for only one more. If there's anybody else who'd like to ask anything. No, I think... Oh, there's one here. Sorry, I thought I'd seen another hand.
Hello. It's perhaps a rather boring question. Do you ever have trouble extending your stories to the right length? It sounds ridiculous. You can round the story before you're ready to finish, in a way. And I wondered if that was a problem.
Occasionally you say, but I've done it. That's it. Yeah. Yes, that does happen, I think.
Do you leave them there, even though they're your editor may say that's not long enough?
I don't know, really. I think if I was sure at that moment that that was the end of the story, that would be it. You mustn't just drag it out to write a story. Oh, no. If the story's said to be 2,000 words, I don't know what you do.
Well, we commission stories at 2,000 words.
You do, yes.
But actually, I often think that it doesn't harm if a story comes in a bit longer, and there's I mean, this is something I learnt from William Trevor, actually, a long time ago, that he does 17 edits on average across things. And he once came to read his stories for me for radio, and sat down and was about to start recording them and said, "This is too long," and started scoring it out. And I was going, "Please stop, because it'll be too short for the slot." But I think one of the reasons that stories like yours are so have no wasted wordage in them is because they're not frightened to be very short. And I presume you do a lot of editing to
enormously.
Cut down.
Yes, I do cut down.
And that's a practice which, I think people are not rigorous enough. It doesn't matter whether I'm reading novels or short stories. I think writers could often go back, and it's one of the marks of a truly great writer that they've been prepared to kill their darlings, and they've axed lots of things and taken them away. And it's hard to learn to do, I think. But once you've mastered that, you'll be a better writer for it.
Yes, I absolutely agree.
And I assume you must do this all the time.
Yes.
And do you enjoy doing it?
Yes, I do. It's delightful, really, to get rid of all the dross.
It's also,
if you can.
Yeah, it's also interesting, isn't it? Once you've actually taken something out of something, you discover that actually it quite often stands up quite happily without it.
It does.
A long time ago, I dramatised The Flight of the Maidens for Radio 4, and all the episodes came in about 3 minutes longer than they were supposed to by the time we'd got lots of music and things in them, and it was a terribly hard struggle, and I remember being desperate about what I'd taken out, but once it's gone, like anything, it's probably all right.
But I think you were brilliant to do it, really, because it's the hardest thing. If someone else's work's perhaps easier than your own, I don't know, I don't think it is, really. And that is a book that goes all over the place. I mean, it's a lot of strands there to think about. Yeah. Too many, I think. You should have taken more.
No, it was a wonderful book to do. I can see Diana nodding at me, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to bring our part of this session to a halt. But it's been a pleasure to talk to you, Jane, and thank you very, very much for your frankness.
Very much indeed. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, Jane is not only a superb writer, she's obviously an amazing reader. A fantastic reading, Jane. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Di, for the exchange and for being in the chair this session. So we're now going to come to the culmination of the session, which is actually going to be the presentation of the Charleston-Chichester Award. Just before we get to that point, I thought you might all like to know who made this decision, who are the panellists who decide each year who's going to receive the award. I know some of them are with us this afternoon, apart from Di. So I'm just very quickly going to let you know who's contributed to this. I think, if I remember, if I've done this correctly, it's in alphabetical order. So Cortina Butler, who is with us, I know, who's the Director of Literature at the British Council. Patrick Cotter, who's not with us, who's director of the very prestigious Frank O'Connor Award, which is run from Cork in Ireland, one of the major hubs of the short story. Cathy Galvin, founder of the EFG Sunday Times Short Story Award and the Word Factory. I'm not sure whether Cathy's here. Alison MacLeod, who is with us, and I'm going to invite onto the platform in a moment, who's Professor of Contemporary Literature at the University of Chichester. Ra Page, who's publisher of Comma Press. Comma Press is a marvellous press which based in Manchester, specialises in the publication of short stories and actually publishes all the BBC National Short Story Award anthologies. And Di Speirs, as I've already told you, and I make some contribution myself. So I'd now like to invite Alistair Burtonshaw, who's the director of Charleston, and Alison MacLeod from the University of Chichester up onto the platform just for a moment. And don't worry, no long speeches. Okay, so on the basis that it's never too late, Jane, I'm going to hand over firstly to Alison to say something on behalf of the University of Chichester.
Thank you, Diana. Thanks very much. Jane, it is an absolute privilege to be here today on behalf of the university to give you our warmest congratulations on the award and our greatest thanks on accepting the award. It's a real delight. It's perhaps a particular delight because, as Diana said earlier, at the university we love the short fiction form, and it features prominently in every program from the BA, from year 1 to 2 to 3, the BA in English Literature and Creative Writing, through our MA in creative writing, up through the PhD, where we have absolutely brilliant writers writing short stories and studying the form and winning awards, I have to say. I have 2 of our very brilliant writer PhD students here at Small Wonder today. So we couldn't be more delighted to be associated with this award. We also have, just if you've seen it, you're probably sitting on it at the moment, there's a card that says Thresholds, and there's a floating girl in the Brighton Viaduct turned upside down. And Thresholds is an international digital platform we run that has short stories, interviews, articles, pieces by writers, pieces by editors, all about the short fiction form, and it goes out of Chichester and it goes absolutely worldwide. If you'd like to find out more about it, just plug it into Google, Thresholds short story, and it will come up. And I'm really pleased to say that we have the podcast, a podcast coming up, masterclass interviews with Jane Gardam, and that will be appearing on the site soon, as well as another interview, masterclass with Marina Warner. So we feel very, very lucky in that way. And if I may, just to switch sides of my brains for a moment, in one part of my life, and I'm an academic at the university, in the other bit of my life, I'm a writer. I'm a writer of short stories, and I won't whisper that. I will say it very gladly and loudly. And as a writer too, Jane, you've been a huge inspiration.
Thank you.
I love the way you combine wit and edge in your work. I was rereading many of the stories last night, and I love the way you do place, which we heard in Soulmates. It's such a delicate touch, but sharp around place. And I think maybe most of all, I love the way your work spans the dark and the sacred. I think that's just so rare and special, and you take these bold leaps of the imagination that, I don't know, I suppose you're always reminding me that, that reality is bigger than we are in your work, and I love that, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Alison. Well, really, it just remains for me to once again thank Jane and Di and present the award. So without more talk from me, I'm going to present this wonderful jug, which has been specially commissioned from Sophie McCarthy. As you will see, and I feel very trepidatious in picking it up, it has images from Charleston, including Henry the Lurcher, who was painted by Duncan Grant for Vanessa Bell to protect her at night. And I believe there is a rather wonderful inscription, Jane Gardam, Charleston-Chichester Award for Excellence in Short Fiction, Small Wonder 2015.
Thank you so much. It's most beautiful. Thank you so much.
We know that Jane, she loves flowers, she loves gardening, she loves the Charleston garden and the motifs that appear in the decoration in the house and garden. So I hope you'll enjoy that, Jane. Just one other thing I would say, for those of you who haven't had enough of Jane this morning, there's an interview, a profile of her in the Sunday Independent today in relation to receiving this award. So I'm now going to thank you as the audience. You've been a wonderful audience, very supportive, very engaged. I'm going to call on your patience just for 2 or 3 minutes longer while we take Jane off the stage to the back, to the bookstall, where she'll be willing to sign books. So thank you, and thank you, Diane, thank you, Jane, once more.
Thank you.